Stanford University.
That was not my plan, but it has been an incredible experience. And I think I'm going to skip ahead. What I'm going to do, Jaya told me that these slides will be available to you after this talk. And so what I did was to throw a whole bunch in here, some of which I may talk about and some of which I may not, because what I'd like to do is maximize time for your questions. Throughout the day, I've had an opportunity to answer incredibly different sets of questions, and so hopefully we'll have that chance here today. But what I would like to highlight is that I'm here of all things to deliver hope from the Heartland. We did not like climate legislation, but as it turns out, we really like energy efficiency and renewable electricity. How do I know? Because in 3 short years, we went from prominent legislators in the state of Kansas saying on the Senate floor that wind energy was a pipe dream, to those same senators saying less than 3 years later that wind energy is a critical part of our energy mix and a fundamental part of our future economy. That was a remarkable and rapid shift that we think can be replicated in other places. Better yet, in my opinion, in 1 short year, 6 Kansas communities, population 1,000 to 50,000 souls, saved, as Jaya said, 6 million kilowatt hours, and locked in permanent future savings of 7 million kilowatt hours each year. Those 6 communities gave 2,600 volunteer hours. And in some ways, that's the most inspiring message that I have to bring, because we did not have any expectation that Kansas citizens would get as excited as they in fact have about energy efficiency. Electricity is incredibly cheap in Kansas. We pay about 9 cents a kilowatt hour residential, and that's up in the last few years. Previous to that, we were at about 6 cents. So there's not an economic real driver there. It had to be other reasons. We also had a great time doing it, and one of the things that I'll be talking about and that I'd love to emphasize is that fun in this equation turned out to be incredibly important. We were able to refigure energy efficiency from sacrifice to win, and that was a critical change. Because energy efficiency, the least sexy and most important of energy strategies, has now found devotees across our state. And those are some of the most influential champions in the state. So we have presidents of chambers of commerce. We have superintendents of schools. We have mayors, city managers. We have priests, pastors. The people who are most influential in their communities are saying that energy efficiency needs to be our first fuel. And that's a tremendously exciting thing in a state that 3 years ago had not heard of energy efficiency. Put differently, we are achieving energy efficiency gains and greenhouse gas emissions in real time, and our means of doing so is building a foundation and the political will for better policy. More on that in a minute. Several people have asked how this came to happen, so I'm showing a slide to tell you. The Climate and Energy Project started 4 years ago with an argument that I had in the kitchen with my father-in-law, who's that man right there. And the way that I ended up in Kansas was that other man over there, Donald Worster, with whom I studied environmental history. Wes is the founder of the Land Institute, which is about a 30-year-old nonprofit in Kansas that has been devoted to sustainable agriculture and has made tremendous strides in developing perennial cropping systems. And Wes had been testifying against some coal plants out in western Kansas, and I suggested that perhaps testifying in eastern Kansas against coal plants proposed for western Kansas might not be the most productive way to go forward. And he said, well, what would you do? And I said, well, I would make a great case for wind. And he said, would you quit your job? And the next day we were on the phone with a funder, and the Climate and Energy Project was born. And so at the beginning, and still, what we were persuaded of is if what you want to do is to reduce emissions, in the Heartland, there's really only one huge opportunity, and that's the electric sector. The transportation sector, because we're such a rural region, is very hard to address. Vehicle miles traveled can't be reduced dramatically because we move around a lot and there's no opportunity really for mass transportation. So the electric sector, which is 80% dependent on coal, was a great opportunity, particularly given that most of our plants, as they are everywhere across the country, are aging. So the average coal plant in Kansas, as elsewhere, is 40 years old. We are either going to make massive investments to retrofit those plants, or we're going to shut them down. How can we shut them down? Only if we have other sources of power available to us. And so in the short term, of course, what that means is energy efficiency. But in the long term, at least in Kansas, what it probably means, certainly what it seems to mean at this point, is wind. Because we have a tremendous wind resource, the second biggest in the nation. We have great capacity factors, and that wind is relatively economic even today. So our notion was, let's get a bunch of wind in the ground and then see what happens. So that was the beginning. It moved after that. Anybody know what that is? Everybody knew. Not everybody does. So the gateway to the West, and this is important, right? Because the Heartland is kind of nobody's region. And I learned this to my great sadness when I was searching for funders for our work in these states. Because there's the Northeast, and there's the West Coast, the Pacific region, there's the Sun Belt. But as it turns out, I don't know how many, let's see a show of hands. How many people think Kansas is in the Midwest? Ooh. Okay, I thought so too. No, according to most of our funders, that is not the case. The Midwest is actually the upper Midwest, so that would be Minnesota, Wisconsin, even Ohio, kind of the Great Lakes sort of Midwest. So we were left kind of out in no man's land. In some ways, that's a good thing, because what it means is we have done very little. So there's an enormous amount of low-hanging fruit in terms of energy efficiency, and a real case to be made for wind in terms of economic development. Okay, so I would submit to you today why the gateway, partly because of the regional argument, but more to the point, because energy efficiency and renewable energy, I think, are the gateway drugs to climate conversations. They are addictive. They will get you hooked. And that, I can say, absolutely has been true in Kansas. As soon as communities started acting together, I do that kind of thing all the time, don't worry. They did get hooked, and they wanted to do more, and they wanted to learn more. And that has opened up the possibility for long-term, durable relationships that make real conversations possible. I think this is important because smart people tend to think that the path to better policy and to social change is information. Most of us in this room are susceptible. We learned things, it changed our mind, that changed our actions. We think that everybody is going to follow suit, but in fact, that's not at all the case. We know too well that there's ample data and modeling and framing available for climate issues in this country, and yet opinion continues to go backward on these issues, particularly in my part of the country. So I would submit that those to whom data is compelling are already with us. The question now is, how do we get to everyone else? And that, I think, is where action comes in, because providing solutions and working together to implement them, celebrating successes along the way, and just plain showing that it can be done with economic benefit is critical. Our skeptics don't trust models. They don't believe jobs projections. Missouri is not called the show me state for nothing. They want to see the benefits. And so it is incumbent on us to show them what those are. We need to prove out what we propose. We need to make energy efficiency and renewable energy default choices because they work and because they're cost effective. And not at all, last but not at all least, because they build resilient local economies. Okay. So again, our first focus was wind. And I'll talk for just a second on what we did and the happy circumstances that led to some successes in short order. So the first thing that we did is we realized that most Kansans really had very little idea what wind was going to contribute, what it was going to contribute in economic terms to their communities, what kind of energy it was going to contribute on the grid, what kind of a cost factor we were going to be looking at. So we held forums across the state, legislative forums, citizen forums, forums everywhere that they would have us. Many, mind you, in the winter. This was mostly January and February. It was snowy and icy, and hundreds of people showed up, which stunned us, to talk about this. We had utilities who were saying wind's too expensive. We had the National Technical Director of Wind Powering America to talk about empirical costs of integration and economic benefit as modeled by NREL. We had wildlife advocates who were saying wind is bad, it's going to kill a lot of birds. We had habitat representatives who were saying transmission and wind are bad, they're going to destroy a lot of landscape. We had transmission builders, we had wind developers, we had everybody we could think of from around the question to answer questions honestly, and we really tried to foster a candid forum for conversation. That was wildly successful because what we did after the forum took place, a bunch of people talked on a panel, there were a lot of questions and answers. People then were able to go off into focus groups where they would talk to the people that had their particular expertise that they were interested in, and then came back to plenary. And the question to all of these communities at the end of this was, okay, so on balance, yes or no, do we want to develop wind in this region, do we not? And overwhelmingly, the answer was yes, we want to. So that was sort of our first step. The National Technical Director of Wind Powering America, Larry Flowers, was tremendously helpful, and he recently left NREL, and that's a horrific loss for those of us out in the countryside because he was willing not only to bring his own expertise to communities all over the hinterlands, but also to put NREL's expertise in our pockets for presentation to communities. It was quite remarkable. We were able to introduce him to Governor Sebelius and then Lieutenant Governor Parkinson, who immediately agreed to put together a wind working group for the state, and who also went to K-State, our ag university, and created a wind application center so that we had engineers in the state who were really talking about the kind of future that both the universities and the supply chain could have all the way up and down. We took the American Wind Energy Association, it shows me up there. We took the American Wind Energy Association on an economic development tour. And that was, we went through the windy communities and spoke to economic development professionals about exactly what kind of benefit they could expect to see if wind was developed where they were. Legislators came to that too, which was tremendously helpful. The American Council on Renewable Energy issued a report that many were very skeptical of, but nevertheless set the flag very far out in the future and said that we should be creating 20,000 megawatts of wind. To give you a comparison, we have about 1,000 megawatts in the ground today, and that's pretty good. So enormously high potential, both for wind and for biofuels, and for biomass actually. Then we partnered with the Advanced Manufacturing Institute at Kansas State University to study the companies in Kansas who could potentially participate in the supply chain. So what were the other ancillary benefits? So there's the wind development that helps farmers and ranchers to keep their land. But there's also a supply chain opportunity, and in fact, Siemens, multinational energy giant, put in a cell plant in Hutchinson, Kansas, a tiny little town that now has 400 people working for Siemens. So that helped people to recognize what was possible. This manufacturing supply chain study showed that there was tremendous potential there as well. We had booths at the Kansas State Fair where we had volunteers from all over the state, and kids were able to make wind turbines, and parents were able to get online and look at the wind resource at their home and see if it would pay back putting a small turbine in. And then, after we'd done all of that work, we were lucky enough to have previously a renewable electricity standard had only been proposed with climate legislation. Finally, there was a potential for a separate freestanding renewable electricity standard. When that happened, we were able to go to Senator Brownback, our famously conservative senator who wanted to be governor, and to show him a poll that we took with a conservative pollster that showed that well over 80% of mandate-averse Kansans supported a federal renewable electricity standard and were willing to pay extra for the electricity that that would generate. In a sense, what we were able to say is, future Governor Brownback, this is a no-brainer, you can't lose with this. And indeed, he not only voted for it in committee, but he ended up co-sponsoring a federal renewable electricity standard before he left office to, in fact, become our governor. So Governor Brownback continues to champion wind and is considering creating a bioenergy work group to mirror the wind working group. In his recent inaugural address, the governor said Kansas is proud to be the wheat state and we need to become the renewable state, that we should lead and we should dominate in renewable energy, which was kind of thrilling. His administration's first event at the governor's mansion was the kickoff of the Take Charge Challenge. And speaking of the challenge, energy efficiency is my absolute favorite topic. Why? Because it gives you immediate source of energy. This is the challenge that nobody wanted to fund, and then the New York Times really liked a lot, so I'm really proud of it. We had an enormous number of partners, and it started with utilities. So in the past, environmental organizations have tended not to work directly with utilities in our part of the world. We decided it was critical to partner with them, and we had several goals for this program, but one of them was to demonstrate that energy efficiency could work in every kind of town in Kansas, rural, suburban, sort of urban, we don't have a huge amount of urban, and that every kind of utility could succeed, investor-owned utility, rural electric cooperative, and municipal. So we partnered with all those kinds of utilities and worked in all those kinds of communities. And we set forth a challenge. We went with the utility to the mayor and the city manager and asked if they'd like to participate. We fully expected that most of them would say to go away and find another town, and nobody did. They all said yes, our first round picks. Once they said yes, we asked them to help us to recruit a leadership team. And that leadership team was supposed to be composed of the most influential people in their communities. So again, the sort of people that I mentioned previously. The city manager and the mayor certainly, also always the superintendent of schools. If there was a medical center, the CEO of that or somebody in that organization, the president of the Chamber of Commerce, beloved priests and pastors, the Boy Scout leaders, and so on and so on and so on. We recruited everybody that we could think of. Yeah, that's that. And then we partnered with Philips Lighting. And Philips put together this brilliant, really fabulous website where you could go and in real time see how your community was doing. So when you first landed on the page, you had an incandescent bulb, and then the CFLs would drop, and whichever was biggest at the moment that you checked was the town that was winning at that moment. What you see here is the banner that was constantly running, showing the switches that had recently been recorded. And anytime that we got a crazy number of switches, we had a volunteer actually go to that person, because in those towns you can know who that person is, and check if in fact they had done it. So we had some corrections. But then what you could also see, so you kind of got the credit of seeing your name scrolling on the banner for a while, but this changed. The impact in this case is total dollars saved, but there was also landfill waste eliminated and all kinds of other categories that were tracked there. So at any given time, you could see how your community was doing and get other people out to do more and better. So essentially our goals were four. We wanted to demonstrate that real reductions were possible in every community with every utility. We wanted to make our partner utilities heroes. We wanted to celebrate their successes and clap so loud that they had to keep offering these programs, that their customers and they would see how valuable this was. We also critically wanted to identify and nurture influential community leaders, and that was in many ways the best thing that happened. We had people that we would never have expected doing public service announcements and reaching out and really pressing their peers to make changes. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we really wanted to refigure energy efficiency from sacrifice, as it had been previously understood, to a win. We wanted to say this is about winning. and that worked. So the challenge was heavy on volunteer time and commitment. The leadership teams crafted quarterly challenges. They planned and manned events to launch and celebrate those challenges. They recorded public service announcements. They got lots of their constituencies riled up and active. Each town took a unique approach, even while sharing core components. The Boy Scouts delivered weatherization kits in low-income neighborhoods. School kids held vampire hunts at Halloween. They had the superintendents did these really hilarious, embarrassing skits, and then the kids went and looked for vampire load in their homes, plug load, and brought back energy audits and their intended actions. And the kids that brought back the most won a pizza party. The Home Depot offered in one of the towns a 10 under 10 bucket, a bucket of things that all cost under $10 that would make a huge difference in energy savings in the home. And they demonstrated those things over the course of the year in the parking lot or in the store. Let's see. Oh, and then it was all about food in Kansas. There were pancake feeds, there were ice cream socials, there were pizza parties, there were donut mornings. It went on and on. Okay, and what were the results? It was really pretty great. So 6 million kilowatt hours were saved, over 51,000 bulbs changed, over 1,000 programmable thermostats installed, and that doesn't sound like a big deal except when you realize that those programmable thermostats are also interruptible. And so these give the utilities an opportunity to cycle these air conditioners at peak, which in Kansas makes an enormous difference. Over 400 weatherization kits, you see the results. 2,600 volunteer hours that people gave for free so that their neighbors could save energy. That's just the impact of the lighting. We can scooch through that. This I do want to talk about just for a moment. This is our losing town. This is Salina, where Wes Jackson lives, my father-in-law, which is served by Westar Energy. And we were able to generate 830 watt saver signups. That was the programmable thermostat. In just 2 months. They got regulatory approval almost at the end of the challenge. So I can only imagine what we could have done had we had the entire year. But the biggest, best story here is that million kilowatt hours saved by the school district. And what I want to emphasize here is this is one of those cases where policy would be insufficient because this was all behavior. As it happened, these two schools, the superintendent of schools was on our leadership team. And there were 2 schools that had been built at the same time. They both were retrofitted for energy efficiency just a few years ago. So a lot of the low-hanging fruit had already been captured, a lot of the operating systems and so on. But the superintendent, since he was thinking about it, as he had not previously, was looking at an audit of the energy use, and what he found was that one school was using dramatically more than the other. And so the 2 principals went jogging together every morning, and so he joined them for a jog, and he said, you guys, you need to figure out what's going on, and you got to reduce that use, because we got to get this down. And what they found was it was all behavioral changes, primarily of the janitorial staff, and just when lights were left on and when heat was left running. The schools made a really remarkable decision over the summer to leave the buildings at 90 degrees, so the staff was willing to put up with that for the savings, and they've kept it that way after the challenge, which was fairly remarkable. So not only were there huge savings at the Energy Hog building, but also substantial savings at the other building because the two principals were getting together and really thinking about what those operations were. To take another example, the federal weatherization program had been around a long time, but thanks to Take Charge, signups ballooned in our towns, adding another 1 million kilowatt hours in prescribed savings. Because of Take Charge, people heard about the program, they learned whether they qualified, and they actually applied to help their town win. Which is all to say that policy is necessary, but we need to remember that it's not sufficient. We need real people to really buy in, to be looking actively for those opportunities to save energy and to be pushing hard to maximize their savings. Absent the challenge, that just would not have happened. Now, each of these communities has caught the bug, and what's especially gratifying to us is that these communities have gone on at the end of the challenge when it's over to pursue significant community efforts, including the lighting retrofit of a library, the LCD street lights, efficiency improvements to wastewater treatment, and so on. So once people recognize the power of efficiency, many start looking for those additional gains. How cute is that little kid? Yeah. Really? And the dancing thermostat, I just want to say, that was one of my staff members right there. She was dancing too, but she wouldn't put herself in the slide. This was a ton of fun, and I can't overemphasize how important that is. Environmentalists often get a bad rap. We're the doomsayers and the doomsdayers and the naysayers, and not just NIMBYs, but sometimes bananas. Not anything ever, what is that? Never, anywhere, under any circumstances. But this time we gave citizens immediate solutions that help them save money today and save money tomorrow. And we gave them an opportunity to take some measure of control of their energy future just at a moment when the economy was collapsing, energy prices were rising, it was unclear what the regulatory situation was going to be, and there was a lot of fear about what was going to happen with electricity prices. So it was an exciting thing, and it was a great, great time. Quick slide that you can look at some other time on kind of other things that we did after to keep the bug moving. So things we know, and this is from both our wind and our efficiency work. The message matters, and it matters a lot. Where we live, there are plenty of resonant Midwestern values. What's not going to happen in my states is that people are going to take action on the basis of climate concerns. For the most part. There's a tiny minority that will, but we've done a lot of work that shows that the vast majority of Midwesterners are not motivated by that. But they are motivated by risk management, by stewardship values, and by security, whether that's energy security, food security, or national security. Almost more importantly, and we can talk a lot about message perhaps later, the messenger matters. And this is the part that that we've taken to heart the most. It was clear to us as the Climate and Energy Project working in Kansas that we were not necessarily going to persuade everybody to do what we wanted them to do. But we knew that those presidents of the Chamber of Commerce could do that. We knew that faith leaders could do that. We knew especially that agricultural producers, farmers and ranchers, if properly motivated, could get out and get their peers and neighbors to pursue those improvements as well. And so not only did we work very hard on the message that we were putting into the community, but also who was doing it. And we tried to identify and nurture and raise up local champions who were surprising often, and who were then speaking on their own terms for their own reasons from their own value set. And that amplified our efforts, a hundredfold. It was fairly remarkable. And then the medium matters. And again, this is important because I think in today's highly mediated society, there's a tendency to feel like we can do a lot online, and certainly we can. But there's a lot of noise around energy issues and in general, and climate change certainly in particular. And it's rare these days that you have somebody's full attention. And really the only time that you do is when you're face to face. And so again, focusing on that peer opportunity was huge. And really, that whole challenge that I described to you, the Take Charge Challenge, we spent $150,000 on that. That was a tiny expenditure to save 6 million kilowatt hours. And it was all people to people, right, that made that happen. I don't think there's any other way that we could have gotten to go that fast, that far. So the opportunity for everyone all the time to air their candid opinions, to agree or disagree, to ask challenging questions has proven critical. And then, of course, facts do matter, but choosing them can be important, and we'll get to that in a minute. So I thought I'd very, very quickly run through some slides that I've given at home to give you a sense of how we tend to talk about this. And essentially what we've tended to say is, look, we think climate change is a really pressing issue, and we can tell you all day why we think that. But we're not here to persuade you of that today, because the good news is we can take climate change off the table. Everything we're here to talk about in terms of energy efficiency and renewable energy is a great idea for at least 3 other reasons. And then we talk about the fuels for the future, wind, biomass, solar. We've got an enormous resource in all three areas. The savings that are available, you all know that story, but believe me, not many in the Heartland did a little while ago. And then the benefits. And the benefits that we tend to focus on are these: rural economic development, revitalized manufacturing, especially for wind, jobs, and that's both in energy efficiency and wind. Critically, a hedge against volatile prices in a global market. This is really something, this was a conversation that hadn't been pursued in the Heartland. The notion that we're in a global market for energy now, and fossil fuel prices are going to be volatile and they're likely to climb. So having a hedge against that with a levelized cost resource like wind is critical. Endless local fuel sources, what's not to like, and of course national security, which in an area that has an enormous number of families who have served in the military is especially resonant. Midwestern values that support all of these efforts: conservatism. What we've argued from the beginning is that renewable energy and energy efficiency are fundamentally conservative. I mean, literally, by definition, they are. And so let's talk about that and get rid of this stigma in my part of the country of these being environmental choices. They have environmental benefits too, and that's great, but there are other reasons to do them. Stewardship, the notion that we want to preserve our resources and sort of pursue the Boy Scout principle, that we want to leave our campsite as good as we found it. Community, especially with the Take Charge Challenge, but with wind too. These are opportunities for rural communities to live, to thrive, and they've been dying. And so this is a really exciting opportunity. Thrift. Waste not, want not is still very alive and well in the Heartland. And so something like energy efficiency makes a ton of sense as soon as you start really talking about it. And then innovation, the opportunity to determine our energy future and to do it in ways that will surprise and delight. And then I talk about Edmund Burke because I just can't help it. Just focusing on the actual foundation of conservatism. I mean, this is the man who many people feel is the father of modern conservatism. And he said that society is indeed a contract between those who are living, those who are dead, and those who are yet to be born. And talking about that with audiences in the Heartland is a winning proposition. Okay, so lessons learned, and I'll quickly conclude because I want to have plenty of time for questions. You've heard this already, but information and policy are critical, but they're insufficient. Actions reduce emissions and may lead opinion. So the more that we can act and act together, the more support we can actually build for policy change. Demonstrate as you assert. It's always good to say things, but it's even better to demonstrate that they're possible and in fact beneficial. Harness the competitive spirit. It is an incredible thing. I underestimated it. Earlier, somebody asked what prizes we gave and whether it was too small, too big. And what I answered is that it was probably too big because I'm not sure we needed a prize at all. It was really the pride of winning that mattered to most of our communities. Celebrate success. Many people said to us as we were beginning the challenge, you environmentalists, you're always moving the goalpost. As soon as we do one thing that you say we're supposed to do, move it, and we're supposed to have done more, and we don't get to feel good about what we've done. And so we made sure that we were celebrating everything that had been done, even as we were launching the next initiative. Work always from the bottom up and the top down. So the Climate and Energy Project has done a ton of work, obviously, in communities, but we've also done a great deal of legislative and regulatory work. And so we're constantly trying to go both directions toward change. Okay, and then it's the economy, stupid. I mean, we all know that now. So solutions have to be affordable, and ideally they're economically beneficial. And it's the people, stupid. Really, relationships matter a great, great deal. And if I had one key takeaway from the work that we've done in the Heartland, it's that personal relationships really make a movement durable. And those relationships have got to cross boundaries. In today's really fractured political environment, there could be no more angry political marker in the Heartland, really, than climate change, except maybe abortion. But we're right there. And so the opportunity to really build these partnerships with people who previously might not have sat down for coffee with me. I shared earlier we were able last year to hold a a forum at K-State University with Kansas Farm Bureau on how agriculture could thrive in a low-carbon economy. That would have been unimaginable just 2 years prior, and it was the personal relationship that was developed. And for those gains to stick, we're going to have to stay and continue those relationships. And so what I would encourage everyone to really think through is how to find those unusual champions, how to build those relationships across difference on shared goals, and then stay in the conversation so that years from now we can be talking more productively about climate than we've been able to do to date. That's just basically what I said. And we can talk about that later. There are some slides here, just so you know, again, that we've used in the state a great deal. When we are talking about climate change, what I like to say is, look, forget what I have to say. How about what these guys say? Or these folks? And I say what they say, you know, and these guys. and offering quotes from all of those declarations that help people to understand. In Kansas, the notion is that nobody believes it. Nobody believes it. It's on the radio all the time that climate change isn't happening. So when we do talk about climate change, what we tend to do is put it in the mouths of, again, credible messengers. Okay, so really quickly, why Plan B? That was the name of the talk. Because Plan A provided information, sounded the alarm, and sought to achieve sound policy, but it failed to anticipate climate change as a dominant political marker. I'm not sure anybody could have seen it coming as strongly as it has. So Plan B, and what we've tested in the Heartland, is that we meet humans where they are. We identify common cause. We build durable relationships across difference, and then we work together to achieve common sense gains. And we're convinced that that will not only achieve actual reductions, but also build support for policy change long term. That's my contact information. It'll be in there. And as we take questions, I'll leave you with the trite but true that sits on my bulletin board. So thank you so much for your attention, and happy to answer questions.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.